hear me out. Greta Gerwig should have been nominated for Best Director. Look, this is not me being like, oh my god, it's sexism that she wasn't nominated. Admittedly, all the directors nominated are pretty good. I haven't seen The Joker. I've heard The Joker isn't that good, so I'm not gonna comment on that one. I will talk about Little Women, and I will talk about Greta Gerwig a lot, but I hate being the person who's like, quality is having her nominated. It should be based on merit, and I think she was good enough. Again, just my opinion. I think she was snubbed. I think she was good enough. And there's a history of Hollywood not considering women to be directors. And of course, there's more female directors this year. In fact, there has been a record number this year, but it's still made only 12% of the films this year. So let's take this back. Let's try to explain why women aren't in here. We all know early Hollywood was the first place that brought movies to the mainstream. Of course, you could argue it was overseas, but when we think about movies, we obviously think about Hollywood. It's what got us going. It's what started the Academy. It's what started commercialization and profit of all these films in America. And what are we talking about? America. Again, we all know that turning things for commercialization makes it really hard to diversify because you want to make things viable to everyone and you want them to sell for everyone. It's hard to make a diverse film, and it's hard to make one that is a sincerely female narrative. And that is still true today. While some artistic films get made, and that's a good thing, most of the mainstream movies that get made have an impact on our world, and usually through the lens of a straight white male. Now, while that's changed in recent years, again, let me remind you, history, especially when it's commercial, tends to kind of stay stagnant in that department. We're still learning the white version of history, even though now we have some fun facts about how Americans really were that terrible to Native Americans in our history class. Still brushed over a little bit. Anyways, Hollywood is definitely not one to pioneer diversity. In fact, I would say it's the brilliant creators who have found ways to get their movies into the mainstream. In fact, after the Hays Code, we basically started having these stereotypes that still go on today. Think the queer-coded Disney villain. That's been going on forever. I would say a great recent example is the Disney movie Zombies. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that is a joke. But it is also the best movie of all time, and I couldn't highly recommend it enough. Please God, watch Zombies. Zombies should have been nominated for Best Picture. That's my opinion. Of course, along with that, the Hays Code led to more domestic women, and women who were usually subjugated to being killed off by the end of the movie. Quote Elizabeth Taylor, "I am the slut of the world," dies in car crash. But this video is about directors, the people at the head of the film, the people who get to portray the experience that we, the audience, will feel. They're the storytellers, really. And we have little female directors, so we're gonna have a little female perspective, because a movie is a director's perspective, essentially. And again, 12% of the top 100 grossing movies this year were directed by females, which is not only a record number, it's actually pretty fascinating. And honestly, yes, but could be a little higher. I'm not saying it has to be 50-50, but it seems a little strange. So let's take it back. Before the Hays Code, before Hollywood even, there were actually a good amount of female directors, considering not a lot of movies were made. In fact, Alex Guy Blanche, I can't pronounce names, I cannot pronounce French, I am an idiot who took Latin. She is considered the first female director ever, which is great. Honestly, go Alice. And her first film was La Fille à Tout. But it's a film about babies being born out of cabbages, which is great. This debuted in 1896. Yes, film did exist back then, and she was one of the pioneers of film. She was the head of Garamond Film Company's production and produced hundreds of films herself. This woman was amazing, and it was in a time where women's perspective would be shown. In fact, it's kind of weird. I feel like a lot of women's movement happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and then after the Depression, we see a little lull period, and we'll get into how that has affected the world. After this, her predecessor, Lois Weber, is the first woman to direct a full-length feature film. Because, you know, movies used to be really short because film stocks, and there wasn't really full-on feature films. I think the first one was made in France, and then the first one over here is really racist, and we're not going to talk about it. She was actually able to address complex issues in her stories about birth control and abortion, which honestly, that's controversial now, and don't think it wasn't back then, but the fact that she was allowed to do it and get it made is kind of freaking incredible. Unfortunately, while things were going well for white women at this time, the first full-length feature film directed by an African-American to acclaim, this is what I could find, I couldn't find anything before this, I am sure it's out there, but in America, the first one to actually reach acclaim was Julia Dash's Daughters of Dust in 1991. That is a little too late. But again, we are talking about women, but I feel like it's important to mention how we were there in diversity of gender before, but we were not there in terms of race, which is sucky, and hopefully that will get better from here on out too, because, and we'll get into this later, all the women ever nominated for Best Director have been white, and that shows a problem because the director is the perspective, and there's not a lot of black women directors. Or Asian women directors, and there should be more. In the mainstream, who are allowed to make what they want. But that is because 80% of the Academy is still white. They did make changes to fix that, and 60% is still men, which is a lot better than it was, because that means 40% are female, and that's not something I'm gonna complain about too much. Alright, so then Hollywood becomes commercialized. Ba-bam, ba-bam, Hays Code. It's the 1930s. What are we gonna do? Well, there's not a lot of women anymore, and, you know, we can't really talk about the female experience, but we can talk about domestic women in conventional lives who love their husbands, and if they don't, we kill them. The only female director, only one in the mainstream to survive this, is Dorothy Arzner, and she, oh my god, is she cool. But she only survived making conventional stuff. Still, she was able to get little feminist tidbits in everything she did, which, great. Go Dorothy, love you. She was not only the first female director to direct a sound film, but she was the first female director to be inducted into the Directors Guild, and she was a massive lesbian who had rumored to sleep with a bunch of actresses in Hollywood. Eventually, her older partner, who's a choreographer, choreographed some of her movies. That's pretty cool. So we had a gay woman survive the Hays Code in Hollywood and make conventional movies. Guys, that's great. What's not so great is the only really main contemporary female director at the time was Leni Riefenstahl. If you don't know who she is, big old Nazi propaganda filmmaker. Started some new techniques. Really good at that Nazi propaganda stuff. Horrible, horrible person. Horrible person. So, while Arzner was a legend in the 30s, the next woman to pop up with big success was Ida Lupino for her film Outrage, which was the next major film, and it was released in 1950. The reinforcement of the Hays Code was kind of dying down, so her film was able to deal with the rape of a woman explicitly, which was still, again, extremely controversial, but she got money for it. And she was also the first woman to direct a film noir. In 1952, the code was abandoned, so no more Hays Code. This was due to a Supreme ruling, Joseph Bernstein Inc. versus Wilson, where the Supreme Court was like, nah, First Amendment, bruh. Of course, the industry is still gonna be stuck in its old way because Hollywood tropes are gonna stay stagnant for a very long time. Like, we're still seeing 80s movie stereotypical tropes in high school movies today, especially in Disney movies. Please God, watch Zombies. But we still see some women direct found success in it, Agnes Varda, Shirley Clark, and Jane Arden. But after Ida Lupino's next film in 1966, The Trouble with Angels, it wouldn't be another 6 years until another female director actually came around into the big old main screen, which would be Elaine May with The Heartbreak Kid. She was the first woman after Ida to direct a Hollywood feature film because Hollywood. This also was at the start of the women's liberation of the 1970s, which then saw more women jumping into the workforce and into Hollywood. So we got more directors. And in the 70s, we also have the first Academy Award nomination for a woman in Best Director in 1976 for Lena Wertmüller, who was nominated for Seven Beauties, a film about an ignorant Italian man doing increasingly horrible things for the Nazis. That kind of sounds Academy. Of course, then 17 years later, just a short 17 years from the Academy that started in 1929, you know, because we have to wait like 46 years give or take, for the first woman to be nominated. Just a short 17 years, we get Jane Campion for The Piano, which I feel like you know about this. I don't know why I know about as much as I do about this, but it's just a love story, essentially. We're just gonna simplify it there. Then, a brief 10 years later, we get Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation. There's a ton of video essays about it if you haven't seen it, or just go watch it. Then, another 6 short years for Catherine Bigelow's The Hurt Locker, about the Iraq War, and finally, we win! We get a woman! Finally, after 80 years of the Academy Awards, we have a woman director to win. 1 out of 80 were women. That is a great statistics for us with ladies. We are on the map now. Of course, after that, the Academy took a lull and was like, we don't need to nominate for women for a while. We're good. So then, 8 years later, we get Greta Gerwig for Lady Bird, the story of a multi-layered relationship between a girl and her mother. Now, it's 1920, 3 years have passed, so we can't really expect another nomination for, another 10 years for women, but it's honestly a snub at this point. Greta Gerwig should have been nominated, and due to the history, it looks like she's not going to be nominated for a while, or even again. I honestly think that a win is in her future, due to the success of Little Women, and due to how beautiful of a story it was. I see it in her future, but I honestly think it could have been now just for a nomination. I don't even need a win from her. I would just like to see a woman nominated twice, because none of them have been. And honestly, at this point, it looks like Catherine's win for The Hurt Locker is kind of a fluke, which I hate to say, but I think it's also because of the type of movie that she made. The Hurt Locker is about the Vietnam War, and that's primarily what I hate to say masculine thing, because it's not a masculine thing. Obviously, it's a story that can touch the hearts of multiple people, but unlike something that is more domestic, like Little Women and Lady Bird, and of course, you know, The Piano and Lost in Translation is a love story. It seems like the type of movies women make aren't Oscar material. But we don't have female directors just making Oscar-worthy films. We have Patty Jenkins, who made Wonder Woman, which, God, is the only DC movie I've liked, and it's gorgeous, and there's so many memorable scenes that she made memorable. And then we have Anna Boden, who directed Captain Marvel, which I loved. I just thought it was good. We have Jennifer Lee for Frozen 2, and I liked Frozen 2. I know it could have been a lot better than it was, but it's my childhood, and of course I loved it. But most of these stories aren't really intentionally female. I mean, Frozen is, but Frozen's a kid's movie, and it's for little girls, and you know, Captain Marvel reaches a great audience of men and women because it's a superhero story. And then we also have Star Wars, which has a female lead, but it's meant to reach both men and women, and it's not inherently female story. Why don't we have an inherently female story? I mean, we have a ton of stories about the male experience, and why aren't we representing half of the American population? Or why don't we have more stories with different races? That doesn't seem right either. High budget fantasy films are gonna pull in box office things, but stories about women, they're gonna have to be made by women, and they're gonna have to be produced by people who have enough money to do that. What I mean by this is if the story is explicitly a female narrative, it isn't something for a male audience. And I personally don't believe that, but it's not as marketable. Like, a third of the people who went to early screenings of Little Women were men. And when I went to see it, there's no men in the theater. And I know that's how a lot of people's experiences were. And that's the problem, because I think this movie can get to you no matter what gender you are. It is a good movie, guys. It's so good. Stories about women are a lot harder to tell. Women are used to stories about men. We're gonna go sit in the theater to watch a story about a man. I will sympathize and cry to a story about men. In fact, one of the articles I read about this was criticizing Catcher in the Rye for being a story about men, and I didn't believe that, because I related to Catcher in the Rye, even though the main character is a dude. And I will relate to male stories. In fact, a lot of the shows and things I like have main male characters, but it's just because of the genres I like. But if a story is predominantly female, it's automatically not really made for men, somehow. It's like, in the same article I read, how it's cool for me to dress like this, but if a man were to wear a dress, he'd still get criticism. Even though, fun fact about Little Women, it was often read by females and males as kids. All kids liked it. In fact, Stephen King says Little Women was one of his favorite books and inspirations. Teddy Roosevelt had it on his reading list, but it's still hard to get men in the seats to see this movie, and still, men make up 60% of the Academy, which is better. There's a quote from Little Women about how no one cares about domesticity, and it seems like it's not a problem compared to everything else in films. If you look at the films that win, or the films of the year, a lot of them have to deal with war. We got 1917 nominated. We got The Irishman, which is a high-stakes movie, and it has big themes. We got Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which goes into the Manson stuff, and, of course, Love Letter to Hollywood. And that's also Quentin Tarantino, and I have to admit, he's good. Another thing that got a lot of credit but didn't get nominated, Marriage Story, in a way. Like, it's just so normal and domestic and nice to know stories like that. And it's relatable and heartwarming, and I feel like these movies need to get as much acclaim as others, because you can film an experience that's urgent, but I think there's a point in relating and sharing in the beauty of human life. And I think that's what Little Women does really well. And it shows us the ups and downs of the experience of Joe. I think Greta Gerwig should have been nominated. She made a spectacular film that hit me in the heart, and there's so many talented female directors. Lulu Wang, for example. And I think that we can just do a little better, embrace stories of domesticity. We're not exactly being sexist, but the film industry is not something women feel comfortable getting into. Even after the Me Too thing, it's still a scary idea to jump in, especially if you want to be taken seriously. I've thought a lot about going into film, being a director, and I just can't picture myself doing it anymore. And I praise the people who have gone into this field, and I really hope they continue, and I hope that we see more awards going their way, because I know that award shows are stupid, but they're the recognition and acclaim that I think females need to make their voices heard in the industry. Again, I'm not saying this is sexist. I think that the males nominated are very qualified for their nomination, but we can do better. Thank you for watching. Hopefully this is out before the Oscars. It probably won't be. Please feel free to leave a comment below, as a lot of people did my last one, about how I'm a feminazi, and yeah. Oh, and also, please go watch Be Kind Rewind. Her channel is so good about the history of women in the Oscars. It's so good. She will do a better job telling you everything than I can. Okay, please subscribe and unsubscribe. Bye!